Hey everybody. So, if you're watching this video, you've heard the bad news, and if you're like me, I grew up very much in the 90s, and Soundgarden was one of the many bands out of many that I was introduced to by my older brother. And I actually did a blog probably about a year or two ago, mostly just talking about their last album that they released, Animal King, I believe is the name of it. And, well, hearing about his passing, did certainly upset me. So I just wanted to take this time to talk a little bit about Chris Cornell and a lot of his music that I really liked. And we're going to start where I started from the beginning with Soundgarden. So, first up, the very first album that I was introduced to from Soundgarden was Badmotorfinger by my brother, and probably the very first song of theirs I ever heard was Searching with My Good Eye Closed. And it's such a heavy psychedelic start, and of course once you listen to the rest of the album, it's very much alternative metal, and still very much just a great album, of course, with stuff like Rusty Cage and Outshined, Slaves and Bulldozers, and all sorts of great stuff, and calms down a little bit with stuff like, names are escaping me right now as I try to remember them. Mind Riot. This is going to be heavily edited. And it's funny too, because for the longest time as a kid, when you have certain specific songs that you like those are the only ones that you'll listen to. And it wasn't until I got older, until like my late 20s, early 30s or so, that I actually listened to the entire album of Badmotorfinger, and I appreciate that album so much more, as I do with a lot of their other later stuff. And just an absolutely genuine album, and brilliant. Next up, of course, we have Superunknown, which I think I remember reading a while ago was originally supposed to be titled as Fell on Black Days, but I'm not sure if the band or the studio preferred Superunknown. And that was another heavy one from my childhood, that after Badmotorfinger and then after that coming out, I, just had to have it. Hearing a lot of it, of course, from my brother. And, it just felt... It felt, slightly different just in terms of... mostly in terms of tone between Badmotorfinger and then Superunknown. Just in terms of my opinion, where things just felt darker in terms of everything that they were talking about, from songs like Let Me Drown, Fell on Black Days, Black Hole Sun, stuff like that. And, and that's another album that, again, that I think when I originally listened to it, and then even to now, I, probably loved every single track. Maybe with, a couple of exceptions, like a song like Half, which I remember not liking that much, but now I can look back on it and actually really enjoy quite a bit. As for Like Suicide, I actually really prefer the acoustic version that appears on the EP for songs from the Superunknown, which is also on the special edition of Superunknown that I actually have. Also includes, stuff like She Likes Surprises and Jerry Garcia's Finger, which I don't really remember all too well. I actually only listened to it a couple of times when I first got that EP. But yeah, Superunknown, still a great album. Though, if you had to ask me personally what was probably my favorite album, it's probably a toss-up between Superunknown and Badmotorfinger. Just because, those were the two that I was really introduced to and just really loved so much. My brother never really did play me their first two albums. Trying to remember their names. I believe the second album was called Louder Than Love, or Loud Love. I'm not entirely sure about that, so don't quote me on that. I know their first album was, I think, Super Mega Okay, or something like that. I will, display the images here if I can. But we got to follow that up with what was, at the time, their last album before they disbanded, which was Down on the Upside, which was an album I did like at the time, but I remember not being in love with it. When I went back and listened to it some odd years later, it was an album that did grow on me quite a bit more. I mean, especially with songs like Never Named, which is a song that I can identify with so well and relate to so much. And Burden in My Hand is absolutely brilliant. There are quite a few just really good songs on that album. And I know that apparently the band really didn't like the idea that, with Chris wanting to go, I guess, a little bit softer in terms of wanting to do more acoustic-focused music. Because it's very noticeable, of course, in the album. But I really like it, though. It does work when it's not as heavily focused, because that was never really the part of the band. But I did still really enjoy it. Then, sadly, after that, Soundgarden disbanded, and Chris Cornell actually went solo for a while. And which brings me personally to his first solo album, Euphoria Morning, which is an album I love. I think is absolutely brilliant. I especially love his song When I'm Down. It's a song that gets you, just right here in the feels, and it's a song that could, be related to just about anything, whether it is love, or there's even a part of me that thinks that in some way that maybe the song is about being in love with this form of addiction that you may have. And of course I'm probably totally wrong, but it's the sort of thing where it's kind of open to interpretation, kind of, with the lyric of you know that I love you when I'm down because I'm down all the time. And, and that, of course, is, just a great line, of course. And this, for me, would follow up into the Audioslave years. And, and one thing that I always thought was funny about when Audioslave first started was how there were people, and there was actually one person who I used to work with, who actually complained about how he really didn't like Audioslave, and his argument was because it's not Rage Against the Machine. To which myself and a friend of mine said, yeah, that's why they're not called Rage Against the Machine anymore. And I can certainly understand the argument, where it's certainly the Rage Against the Machine sound with Chris Cornell is, I'm sure, a bit of a distraction. But I really liked Audioslave. I thought they were really good. I really liked their first two albums. I thought Out of Exile was maybe a step up compared to their first one, where they were certainly, figuring out the type of band that they were. Because certainly with that first album, it just sounds like Rage Against the Machine sound with Chris Cornell. But it at least works. It doesn't... it's not like, I don't know who I want to be, I don't know who we are, and it does still work. And they are just really good albums. Their third, though, Revelation, I like really about 3 tracks on there, and that's about as far into it as I got. I wasn't able to enjoy them as much. I would like to give it a second listen, of course. Which finally brings us to the King Animal album. An album I was pretty interested in, but, sometimes for me, when you have a band that disbands 20 some odd years ago, or maybe less, sometimes when you have bands that go on such a long hiatus and then decide to get back together and make an album, they kind of lost their touch a bit. And the reason I say that is one song in particular, which appeared on the Avengers soundtrack, actually was their song "Live to Rise," which I do like, but I mean, I even remember my sister saying that doesn't sound like Soundgarden, and she's right. It really doesn't sound like the Soundgarden that we used to know, and I mean, that's understandable. They've obviously changed over time. And kind of a complaint that I had about King Animal, because I listened to a couple of tracks, and a lot of it just kind of sounded like the band was really not together when they made it. Where basically it sounds like the music was recorded, in a completely different state, and then Cornell recorded his lyrics in a completely different place. Because everything just kind of doesn't mesh too well together. Like, Chris feels like he's a bit out of beat at times. Of course, I really only listened to those tracks once, but I listened to a good amount of them. It is something I would be willing to give a second listen to. I will, of course, also mention I do own the Telephantasm collection, which is basically a best of, and then, a bunch, basically like half their catalog release, where it's stuff, from like their early days, and some of it is remastered. Like, that was the first time I got to hear Flower, and of course Beyond the Wheel, and stuff like that, which, you listen to that and you can really be able to say, like, wow, okay, well, now I know why people were comparing Soundgarden to bands like Black Sabbath or Led Zeppelin. Saying that, oh, like, these guys, they're like Black Sabbath and, in a modern day, like, Led Zeppelin. You can certainly see that comparison there. And, and it's just a shame, that something like this has to happen. Because Chris Cornell, he was another one of those artists, musicians out there that was certainly a part of my youth. And, it was a band that I would listen to a lot, and I love his lyrics, I love his voice. It's just a shame, that something like this has to happen. But at least we still have a lot of his great music out there. Well, everybody, I hope that you've enjoyed this little trip down memory lane. Let me know what you guys think. Like, what are your favorite albums, be it of Soundgarden or Audioslave, or even Chris Cornell's solo work. And I hope you guys enjoyed. See ya.